Before the internet, before every mystery in the world could be debunked with a quick search, our childhood fears were forged in a much smaller, stranger crucible. It was a shared landscape of terror, sculpted by just a handful of television channels, the stern warnings of our parents, and the wild, unverified rumors that swept through the school playground. And at the heart of this experience was a sacred British ritual, hiding behind the sofa. It wasn't just a physical act of ducking for cover, it was a state of being. It meant you were watching something so deliciously, brilliantly terrifying that you couldn't possibly look at it, but you couldn't bear to look away either. It was a communal rite of passage, a sign that you were old enough to be scared by grown-up television. So, let's pull the cushions off that old settee and take a brave look back at the things that sent a nation of children scurrying for safety. And astonishingly, some of the most effective, professionally produced terror came not from a horror film, but from the government itself. Welcome to the world of the public information film. Government didn't have a monopoly on terror. The real masters of the craft were waiting for us every Saturday tea time, beamed directly into our living rooms. Of course, we're talking about Doctor Who. It all started with that ghostly, wailing electronic theme tune and the swirling psychedelic vortex of the opening titles. It was a signal that for the next 25 minutes, the normal rules of reality were suspended. The monsters forged in the fires of a BBC budget were masterpieces of low-tech terror. The Daleks with their grating electronic shrieks of "exterminate!" The Cybermen who would strip away your humanity in a chilling upgrade, and the Autons, shop window dummies coming to life. This was the very reason the sofa was invented. It was our shield, a thrilling ritual you shared with your family. But the Doctor wasn't the only source of televisual terror. Take Worzel Gummidge, a charming show about a talking scarecrow whose head was detachable and who was infatuated with Aunt Sally, a cruel, life-sized doll. It was pure, unfiltered rural Gothic. Then there was the quiet, psychological horror of Chucky, the story of a boy possessed by a friendly but deeply strange alien consciousness. And for pure, atmospheric dread, nothing could top Children of the Stones. Filmed in the ancient stone circle at Avebury, this series followed a father and son who move to a strange village where everyone is uncannily happy. The villagers, with their blank smiles and their favourite phrase, "happy day," were utterly chilling. It was a slow-burn folk horror masterpiece for children, steeped in paganism and a terrifying sense of inevitability.
And sometimes the fear began before the show even did. It was embedded in the opening credits. The undisputed champion of terrifying theme tunes was Tales of the Unexpected. The haunting, tinkling melody, combined with the silhouette of a dancing woman and images of roulette wheels and tarot cards, was a perfect slice of suburban dread. It promised a story with a nasty twist, and the theme music alone was enough to send a shiver down your spine, setting a mood of unease for the entire evening. Our trusted television set was a portal, and sometimes it brought the nightmares through with it. But the flickering screen didn't hold a monopoly on our nightmares. A quieter, more insidious kind of fear was lurking in our bookshelves, in the pages of comics, and in the dark, scratchy illustrations of old storybooks. This was the terror in print. Many of us discovered early on that the original fairy tales, collected by the Brothers Grimm and others, were not the gentle, sanitized versions we know today. They were grim, brutal warnings from a darker time. We read about Cinderella's stepsisters slicing off parts of their own feet to fit the glass slipper, or the witch in Hansel and Gretel being brutally cooked in her own oven. These were stories that didn't just entertain, they left a mark. As we grew older, many of us graduated to the next level of fear by picking up books we were definitely too young for. We might have stumbled upon a classic ghost story by M.R. James, or found one of our parents' pan books of horror with their famously gruesome covers. But perhaps the greatest master of childhood terror was Roald Dahl. Beneath the playful surface of his stories was a current of pure nightmare fuel. The book The Witches, for example, wasn't just a fun adventure, it was a survival guide. The detailed description of the Grand High Witch peeling off her human face to reveal the rotten, decaying creature beneath is one of the most terrifying passages in children's literature. And sometimes it wasn't even the words that scared us, it was the pictures. Old books were often filled with strange, spidery ink drawings, illustrations of gnarled, claw-like trees, shadowy figures with glowing eyes, or witches with long, crooked fingers. A single, unsettling picture could ignite the imagination in a way that no television show could, forcing you to fill in the horrifying details yourself. Unlike the jump scare of a television monster, the fear from a book was a quieter, more personal affair. It was a terror you had to build, colouring in the shadows with your own imagination, and it would stay with you long after you'd turned out the light. And once we put the books down and left the house, the fear followed us. It was in the air we breathed, passed down from parent to child in a domestic curriculum of dread, or whispered from friend to friend across the playground tarmac. Our parents, in their loving quest to keep us safe, armed us with a series of warnings that we took as absolute scientific fact. The most famous one was the threat of square eyes if you sat too close to the television, a terrifying geometrical transformation of your very own eyeballs. Then there was the internal horror of swallowing a piece of chewing gum, which you knew was a 7-year sentence, or an apple pip, which could lead to an entire orchard sprouting from your stomach. And of course, the dire warning never to swim for at least an hour after eating, lest you be struck down by a mysterious food-induced cramp and sink like a stone. And perhaps the ultimate threat deployed whenever you pulled a particularly grotesque face: keep doing that, and if the wind changes, you'll be stuck like that. It was a meteorological and biological terror in all one.
Once on the playground, we operated on a complex system of unwritten supernatural laws. There was the careful pavement crack cha-cha, performed to avoid the terrible fate of stepping on a crack and breaking your mother's back. This often extended to iron drain covers. To step on 3 in a row was to invite some unspecified but certainly dreadful doom. And for some reason, thanks to television and films, we were all convinced that quicksand was a far more immediate threat than it actually was. For children living in British suburbs, miles from the nearest bog, the fear of being suddenly swallowed by the earth was wildly disproportionate. You'd be forgiven for thinking that every local park and patch of mud was a potential gateway to the earth's core. These weren't monsters or ghosts. They were the quiet, pervasive anxieties that made the world feel a lot more dangerous than it really was. But perhaps the strangest fears of all were the ones that had no name, the anxieties that came from the quiet, ordinary corners of everyday life. These were the unintentionally creepy things. There was the uncanny horror of the ventriloquist's dummy. Figures like Lord Charles or Orville the Duck were prime-time family entertainment, but their glassy dead eyes and hinged jaws were pure nightmare fuel. Then there was the music from the ice cream van, a happy sound on a summer's day, but when heard from a few streets away in the evening quiet, the tinny, slightly distorted tune became haunting and sinister. We all knew the feeling of walking past a high street shop at dusk and seeing the mannequins inside, those lifeless plastic people staring out with blank eyes from the darkened windows. And at night, the house itself came alive. The groan and clank of the water pipes wasn't a plumbing issue, it was the sound of some great beast stirring in the walls. And of course, there was that uniquely British, melancholic silence on a Sunday evening. It wasn't a fear of a monster, it was an atmospheric dread, the sound of the weekend officially being over. Looking back now, from a world filled with very real anxieties, it's easy to laugh at these quaint, analog fears. The truth is, we remember them so fondly, not because of the terror, but because of the connection. These weren't isolating fears, they were communal. We were all hiding from the same Dalek, we all knew the ghostly warnings of the dark and lonely water, and we all suspected our parents were right about our eyes turning square. It was the thrill of the managed risk, the delicious delight of being safely scared while your family was in the next room. These shared fears were the strange, spooky, and sometimes silly scaffolding upon which we built our imaginations. They gave us stories to tell, jokes to share, and a collective memory of a time when the world was a little bit stranger and the safest place on earth was right behind the sofa. So, we have to ask, what was the one silly thing that truly terrified you as a kid? Let us know in the comments below.